This is The Problem of Unwelcome Epistemic Company by Joshua Blanchard, forthcoming in Epistemic, out of Oakland. Hey, Rethius, how you doing? Welcome in. Hey, Frank, also. I hope you both are well. How's it going out there? Hey, yo, to you, and Frank says, I wonder if the paper will say that the unwelcome cover is using your belief to cover in some way. The unwelcome company is using your belief in some way. What are we reading? This paper appears to be saying, look, there's times when, like, people you don't like agree with you. Is that a good reason to doubt yourself? That if, like, someone you don't like agrees with you? Personally, I don't think that's a problem because, you know, people think differently from you. And just because they arrive at the truth sometimes doesn't mean, like, your truths are wrong. Like, someone else may have faulty reasoning and arrive at the same conclusions you do. So that has nothing to do with you. But, like, that's the thing. Should you be worried about, like, you know, really bad people agreeing with you sometimes? So it's like, you know, what's it called? I don't generally agree with the conservatives in this country very much. But, that's all. You agree with me on the surface. Thank you, Rethius. And Frank says that's only because I believe correct things. I wish that were the case, Frank. What if I imagine someone? Well, see, here's the thing. Like, a lot of conservatives in the United States of America, I disagree with. But we both, like, everybody in this country at the moment was kind of just like a little bit peeved at China. We don't really care. We know they're sending, you know, spy satellites up. That's what everyone does. Are we angry at China about doing that? Not really. It's just embarrassing that their little balloon, even if it isn't, like, technically a spy satellite, it is kind of weather related. It's embarrassing that it got sent over, and I agree that it should have been shot down, and it was shot down. Everyone thinks that. It's like they knew where it was. I'm sure they moved anything that was sensitive out of the way of it getting seen. So it's like, am I angry that, like, people I dislike are in agreement that we should shoot down that spy balloon from China? No. Of course. Like, we all agree on that. And there's a lot of people I disagree with, but we all agree that China got caught doing something silly. And it's more embarrassing that they got caught than doing something that, frankly, everyone should expect countries like China or the United States to be doing. Oh no, Noam Chomsky? Well, we have to see what this is. This is not Noam Chomsky. Welcome in, Maddie Holmes. This is a paper on should you be annoyed or worried if someone you don't like agrees with you. So maybe, like, this is the thing. I was just saying, you know, I agree that we should shoot down the spy balloon. Oh yeah, I agree, no. But, like, this is the thing. Is this going to actually be a problem or not? So we're gonna see if what the author has to say. I don't think they're you know, maybe this is just a waste of time. Everyone agrees that, like, you shouldn't be worried about it, but I was like, you know, I like the title here, so we're gonna read it. And everyone, feel free to ask more questions we go. Frank says, but would you feel a little weird about having that belief if it was only conservative voices that stated the spy balloon stuff publicly? See, yeah, I think that's pushing it. It's like, if it's you and then everyone you don't like and no one you do like, that would be a harder one, because then you might worry, like, did I screw up if I am in the same camp with all these people I don't like? And that's a good point. That's like, yeah. I'd have to just, yeah, it'd be one of those times, like, did I screw something up and I should check it, but yeah. Maddie says they didn't shoot it down because the government was sucking as much intel as they could from it, then they shot it down. Yeah, well, however long they took, Maddie. I mean, I know they left it up. They did probably whatever, the best they could before shooting it down, because there would be no other point. They said, oh, we don't want it to hit anything in civilian land. There's a lot of empty space over the United States. I'm sure they could have shot it down as soon as they wanted to. Earlier. But, like, they waited till basically it was the end of our airspace, like, off the coast, that was still within our, like, you know, a few miles of airspace, and then they shot it down. So, yeah. Hey, Valpo, welcome in. Hope you're well. When the worst person you know has a good point. Yeah, but this is the thing. It's like faulty reasoning, or people who are bad don't always reason incorrectly all the time. The reason they're bad people a lot of times is because they have terrible opinions, but they're not entirely stupid. And so that's why they end up, you know, getting power or doing something, because they're not completely ridiculous, and people like agree with them sometimes, even if it's faulty, but like that's a thing. And so, yeah, Valpo, well, this is Twitch, and that's why this paper is a meme, as you say, but that's why I was going to read it. Maddie says, can you argue it from your own views apart from those of those other conservatives? Well, that was the thing. Like, every so often, like, you're going to agree with people for, you know, different reasons. And if you can justify your views independently, then sure. And so it may be that like me and someone I don't like have come to like the same argument from like different directions, but once we got to that spot, we reasoned in the same way. And so it would be they would have to diverge at some point. Yeah. Well, I hope your takeout is lovely, Valpo. Yeah. Maddie says, I have a friend who is pretty conservative, and we can sometimes agree on a topic, but we use completely different views and factors. Exactly. Like, there's multiple realizability. So it's like, you can realize the same thing in different ways. And like, you can say, look, you're right for the wrong reasons, but I agree that you're right. But like, sometimes you have to give them like, you know, a pinch of salt, like a little bit, like, okay, maybe their reasoning isn't how I think about stuff, but like, that doesn't mean they didn't end up in the right place at the end. And in those cases where like, it's your friend, as you said, like it's one of those, their heart's in the right place. So even though you may start off from different places, you understand what's important, and somehow you both got there. And so like, that's a different thing. But these are people you don't like. That's why bad epistemic company, you think they're bad people. And that's the issue here. Rethea says, this seems sophomoric to you. I kind of agree. Yeah, we have to learn to accept that people will agree or disagree with us regardless of who they are as a person by high school. Yeah. Well, this is the other reason I want to read it, is because I actually don't think that ad hominem attacks are always bad. So it's like, I think ad hominem is actually, you know, sometimes like, some people are just terrible, and even if they're right, I don't want to hear them, because like, everything they do is just gonna like, just is like poisonous, like toxic. And so you don't want to listen to like that toxic person being reasonable, because you know in the end that's just gonna end up toxic. And so even, yeah, maybe this is a high school sophomoric sort of point of view, but even so, there's just like garbage people. I just don't have time to deal with this. Well, that's the thing, Rethea. Sometimes a person is just being a shithead and should be labeled as such. That's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like, and I know you're going to have a point every so often. No one is wrong all the time, every day, 24/7. Like, that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't be an adult if they were wrong all that much. It's just, I don't have time to deal with you, and I don't think anyone should waste their time dealing with shitheads like that. And so that's part of the thing. It's like, I think it's good to reject some people because they take up too much time and space to deal with, even if they have a point every so often. And there's the thing with like the trolls online sometimes. You say, oh, you know, free speech, they have something to say. No, they can go fuck themselves and go fuck off. Yeah, it's like, I just don't have time. It's like, once in a blue moon you have something interesting to say. Well, how about you don't be a jerk about it and just make a point? If I have to wade through shit to get to one little thing, it's like, no, I don't have time for this. There's plenty of other people with good ideas. Your like little crappy point through all your bullshit trolling is not worth my time. Culturally relative, absolutely, Rethea, completely agree. Sure. Rethea says, a self-reflective natural shithead will be challenged by cultural reactions over time and perhaps change your behavior. I would hope so. But how many shitheads are really that self-reflective? That's the reason they're a shithead, is because they lack reflection. They have to grow up in order to change their behavior, and you know, yeah, I'm sure and that's 100% fair. And we don't have to care what the percentage is. No, of course not. But some people do grow up, and of course that happens. That's the way the world is that people start off crappy, and they get better sometimes, and you want to allow for that sort of thing. Yeah. And Maddie says, I'm not going to tap dance around Nazis and eugenicists. I use those terms very rarely, but those views are definitely out there. No, absolutely. It's like, you can make a cutoff. Again, we're not doing the thing here where we're saying, oh, this is the cutoff, and then we're going to, you know, try to figure out exactly who's a good person, who's bad. No, we're doing this like, okay, we got the Nazis and the eugenicists over here, and they can go fuck off. And like, you know, you have tempered your ideas. Maybe I don't agree with everything, but like, you aren't like completely off the deep end like those people. yeah, then maybe I'll listen to you to some extent and see if you have anything like you're not being crazy. But like, yeah, that's basically, I mean, that's right. I'm not trying to like draw a hard line anywhere. And anyone who does, I find, is it's unrealistic. I mean, we've discussed this recently briefly. It's called epistemicism, where you think there are hard lines every so often. Evolve yourself. What are we discussing tonight? Oh, I did the painful thing, evolve yourself, and I'm doing epistemology. I'll tell you in a sec. This is a paper on if like someone you dislike has like makes a good point, like you agree with their end result. Like, should you be worried that you agree with a shitty person? Frank says an untrustworthy person might share only half of the evidence that supports your claim, and if the full set of evidence is time-consuming to research, it will make you update incorrectly. Yeah, like there's more than one way this could happen, Frank. Like they may not be shitty, they may be, using faulty reasoning, like they're just untrustworthy, you can't figure it out. And again, it's people like that you have to be careful about. Well, that's the thing. I think Frank made a good point, evolve yourself, basically saying, look, what was it? If no one else that you normally agree with agrees with you, and then only the people you normally disagree with agree with you. So like all your normal like friends don't agree with you, and then only the people you hate agree with you. Should you be worried about that one idea? So it's like if you break it down that way, it might like you were afraid because the only company you have are crappy people. Then is that evidence to think that maybe you reasoned incorrectly somewhere? Maddie says the scarier eugenicists are the ones who don't know what they're espousing. Yeah, people who don't understand what's coming out of their mouth and like they have power. That's always a very scary thing. Yeah. Rethia says, is the question being worried about being praised by a villain by association being the problem? I think that's right. It's by association. That's why the title is The Problem of Unwelcome Epistemic Company. It's by association. And we haven't even gotten to anything yet. This is just all of us trying to guess at getting our stuff out there. Evolve Yourself says, I'd probably think a little harder about the conclusion if that was the case. Yeah, and that was my initial reaction to Evolve Yourself. Let's give Evolve Yourself a shout out, by the way. If anyone does not know Evolve Yourself, he's an excellent streamer, philosopher. He does meditation, guided meditations, chakra balancing. He's a bit more holistic than me. But like you can talk basically all you want, like a lot of topics. He does mind, metaphysics, philosophy of science. He's got a master's in that area. Also a chess instructor, so there's you can learn something about chess on his streams. But overall, a fantastic guy. Definitely go drop a follow if you have not. Rethia says, I'd be pretty upset if Donald Trump left a message on my Facebook praising my moral judgment. But see, that was what I was saying about I agree that like the U.S. should name and shame China for their little spy balloon thing that we shot down. And everyone's basically in agreement about this. And so it's like, yeah, not all the people you disagree with are going to disagree with you all the time. It's just not in the nature of... Like I said, like no one's wrong 100% of the time. They wouldn't made it to being an adult. Yeah, Rethia says, I don't want to be associated with that dude in morality. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be associated with like people who are known scummy people and telling you that you're doing the right thing. But I mean, you may still be doing the right thing, and the reason they're praising you could be for any reason. Like that would be like up to them. Like it may not be because they actually agree with you. What was the alternative to not shooting it down? Just letting it go, Maddie. I assume you could have just let it float on, and then the Chinese would have picked it up eventually. Read this. Yeah. Now the whole topic, but go where? That's a good question, Maddie. I don't quite know. These balloons are very high up and they float around for a long time. Maybe it would have gotten eventually to some friendly place, or like, the Chinese would have sent out a boat and retrieved it. Like once it got over the ocean. Yeah, I bet all countries would, but like they said they found there was a second balloon over South America. I mean, I'm sure these are like countries that have air forces that could go blow it up, but it's very high up, and maybe they were counting on it not getting spotted for a little while. And like, South American countries are small. Maybe it would just be over them for a little bit and might not get noticed. I don't know. I don't know what the reasoning here is. I'm making this stuff up. But like that's the thing. If this is just one of these things. Like a balloon tech is like not that expensive. I bet the electronics on it weren't that like they're not that expensive. It probably has some good optics just to take photos or whatever. But like it probably wasn't that expensive, so it's probably a very low cost, low risk sort of thing to do. And maybe you could like get lucky every so often and get some good intel. The problem is if it gets spotted and you get caught. And then it becomes an international embarrassment that you were spying just like in this obvious way. So that's all. But yeah. Okay. Did I read this thing? I think I read something like this. I could not have read this. You know, it was something. I think I read something that started off very similar to this. I can't have read this. The problem of... God, I'm terrible. No. Okay. So, we'll start now anyway. Frank says, I think I want a more villainous option as an example, like something the states' rights argument could be, like which could be sound, but somehow I only ever see them mentioned by conservatives who want to evade important federal oversight. Yeah, I don't know. You're gonna have to make one up for yourself. Like, just go find your worst enemy and find something that you agree on, or just could theoretically agree on, and imagine they actually said that for, like, you know, the one time they had a good thought in their head. I don't know. So, this from Chomsky. It says, "It doesn't bother me if I happen to agree with the mainstream media in criticizing the Soviet Union. Trotsky was charged in the 1930s with agreeing with the fascists and in his condemnation of the Soviet Union. And he pointed out that his critique was true. He wasn't going to abandon it if someone else happened to say it for different reasons." Yeah, so that actually makes sense that, you know, people can say things for different reasons and then agree in the end content. Okay, so this is from Donald Trump. Quote, "It's okay to know it's Mussolini. Look, Mussolini was Mussolini. It's okay to..." It's a very good quote. It's a very interesting quote, and I know it. I saw it. I saw what, and I know who said it. But what difference does it make whether it's Mussolini or somebody else? It's certainly a very interesting quote. And that's Donald Trump in response to being challenged for tweeting a quote sometimes attributed to Mussolini. "It's better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep." Yeah, so basically, there's a dictator. He's saying, oh yeah, it's much better that way. Okay, and this is from Diogenes Laertius on the philosopher Epistemic. "On one occasion he was being praised by some wicked men and said, 'I am sadly afraid that I must have done some wicked thing.'" Rethia says, "Is Trump that stupid or is that calculated language?" A lot of Trump is calculated, but he doesn't actually express it particularly well, so he's both. He is a little calculated, and he is also that stupid. Yeah, like when Valpo says, yeah, like when Bernie Sanders was criticized for Cuba having a good literacy program. Yeah, they do, like, yeah, the literacy rate in Cuba is excellent. Yeah, thank you for stopping by, Valpo. Yeah, well, that's it, Matty Home. Porque no los dos. Things could be the same. Could be both. Yeah, porque no los dos. See. All right, so the problem here. Like Noam Chomsky and Donald Trump, we are typically unmoved except by irritation when someone lambasts us for agreeing with a source that is morally or intellectually suspect by our own lights. By accusations of guilt by epistemic association are asymmetrically popular. We tend to issue them in context of disagreement, yet think they bear little relevance for the truth of our own views. This is a mistake. We sometimes face what I call the problem of unwelcome epistemic company. This is the problem of encountering agreement about the content of your belief from an unwelcome source. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company is scarcely explored by philosophers, yet it is a problem of everyday life. In what follows, I elaborate 4 iterations of the problem that unwelcome epistemic company poses. To this end, I introduce and discuss some simple cases. I then offer preliminary lessons of the problem, and I canvass possible responses ranging from extreme confidence of Chomsky and Trump to an epistemic prudishness that always seeks to reduce agreement with unwelcome sources. Yeah, this is well structured, so far. Yeah, so what's interesting, I think Invalpo made this point earlier, is that this is a meme paper, and if you're gonna do something that's kind of memey like this, where you're quoting Trump and Chomsky and then like also classic stuff, the like structurally they're doing a very good job because the content is going to be a little bit silly, so the overarching structure of how they put the paper putting the paper together is impressive, and so this seems like all considering a competent author. The structure is yeah, that's what I mean, Rethius. I completely agree with you on this one. So, all right, 2 iterations. In awesomeness, they wasted very little time. This is like 1 page worth of text, not even, and you can already see they have a good structure to what's going on here. So, things to think about in overarching writing is if you're going to say something very silly or talking about some silly things, the structure has to be very smart. If you're saying things that are already very smart, like you'll notice some of the analytic philosophy, the structure is terrible because that doesn't matter to what you're saying, because you have to focus on like the logic or whatever. And so people get away with terrible writing when they have structured results. But this is the opposite. They have sort of like this sort of wishy-washy examples from like pop media, but then they are very smart about how they're using them. It's just something to think about in your own writing. Okay, iterations. In circumscribing the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, we must appreciate that not all unwelcome epistemic company poses a problem, even a prima facie one. Consider the following case. Blue sky. You believe that the sky is blue. Then you find out that Osama bin Laden also believed that the sky is blue. This case does not even threaten to pose a problem, either epistemic or moral. Although bin Laden might be unwelcome epistemic company of some sort, his company poses none of the problems that I described below. In particular, bin Laden's agreement about the color of the sky raises no epistemic or moral issues about your own belief that the sky is blue or the role of your moral character in coming to that belief. Here is a case, on the other hand, where you might face at least 4 different problems due to unwelcome epistemic company. Refugees. You haven't read much on refugee crime rates in the United States, but you pay some attention to the news. Despite being generally in favor of increased acceptance of refugees, you find yourself with the belief that refugees, on average, commit more crimes than citizens. You then encounter a white nationalist who also believes that refugees commit more crimes than citizens. End quote. 2 of the problems that may be raised by refugees are distinctly epistemic and 2 are moral. The epistemic problems have to do with your beliefs, truth or normative status, and the moral problems have to do with its ideology or implications. I will address these in order. Okay, epistemic problems. In refugees, agreement may provide some defeasible evidence that your belief is false. In other words, the problem of unwelcome epistemic company might take the following general form. False, in quote, falsity. The fact that S believes P is evidence that not P. So yeah, you're just saying the fact that someone believes something is evidence that they must be wrong because they're a crap person. This is a problem having to do with the truth of your belief, but how bad is the problem? The amount of evidence that unwelcome epistemic company provides in case like refugees partly depends on just how unreliable one has reason to believe S really is. Yeah, so how bad is this person? In refugees, this is left unstated. If the white nationalist just gets the relevant matters wrong frequently relative to the average person, but still very rarely, then perhaps you need not worry too much, and what degrees of error both of you bother you will depend partly on your tolerance for epistemic risk. You can always type ! Paper. And so there it is. But yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, yeah, and that the bot will, ! Paper will pop up the link if anyone so wants it. And for people watching YouTube, the link will be in below on the in the description. Yeah. So what? Yeah. So again, so if someone you don't like says it, well, how much do you actually rely on what they say? Okay. But suppose that your epistemic company does provide a great deal of evidence that your belief is false, say because they get relevant matters wrong well over 50% of the time. After all, even agreement from a source that gets relevant matters right only 51% of the time is somewhat evidence that the belief in question is true. Yeah, so I mean, if like this person's always wrong and then they get something there, then you say like a 90% fail rate, then you might think, oh, they said this, then it's a 90% chance that they are wrong because they fail 90% of the time. Okay, in that case, agreement provides evidence that your belief is false. So it's not that they agree with you, it's just that they are wrong 90% of the time and then they said it. Okay, we are only very rarely able to assess the actual or even approximate degree of unreliability of any particular person or even ourselves, whether in general or in specific domains. In light of this, the possibility of frequent error need only be salient in order that falsity might apply to a case of unwelcome agreement. Yeah, and falsity was the thing that says if they agree, then it must be wrong. Even if you can't assign an exact or even vague probability to someone's error, as long as there is a salient possibility that they are more unreliable than not within the relevant domain, their unwelcome agreement in that domain can warrant concern. Yeah, so you can imagine that like someone is spouting nonsense about shit they don't know, and then you agree with them, and it's like, well, the fact that they're like insistent upon it is like, well, they really don't know what they're talking about. Either they're dumb lucky or they're screwing with you. And that'd be a reason to like, check that like you can't be right, because if they think it's right, they don't know. All right. All that being said, even if your unwelcome company is extremely unreliable, the normative force of the evidence provided by falsity will partly depend on your independent evidence for the proposition subject to unwelcome agreement. If you already know that you came to believe via a route that secures more warrant for you than the warrant that your company secures for the negation of your belief, then you may not face much of a problem at all. Yeah, so if you are absolutely certain of something, then it does not matter what like other people say, whether they are crazy or not. All right. For example, suppose that you calculate that 35 plus 15 equals 50, and a mathematically incompetent person calculates the same. Even if this person gets simple arithmetic questions wrong 95% of the time, the evidence provided by their agreement is decisively defeated by your prior independent evidence for the proposition. Rethia says certainty can be fucked with. Yeah, and so that's why the author here is going with the absolute certain case of simple arithmetic. Absolutely. Your total evidence makes it likely that this is just one of those unlikely cases where an extremely unreliable person got a calculation right. Although unwelcome agreement that 35 plus 15 equals 50 is perhaps some evidence that 35 plus 15 does not equal 50, such evidence is decisively defeated by your overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This is not a situation in which you do not face the problem of falsity at all. Rather, it is a situation in which the problem of falsity is just not very severe. Yeah, because, I mean, you could imagine that someone, it wasn't that it was 35 plus 15, but like maybe some very big multiplication, and you happen to know because you checked it. But then like someone else gets it right, and you'd be very, very, very unlikely that they just happen to get the multiplication right. And then you might have to like double check that, oh, they just got it right. But then that would be incredibly unlikely that they get a large multiplication correct. Yeah, I agree that this is a good author. So far, they've been making their points. They're starting off very strong with how they're presenting their argument. So yeah. Okay. The qualification about independent evidence is why it is important to the formulation of refugees that you haven't read much on refugee crime rates in the United States. If you have read a great deal on refugee crime rates, then it is likely that you have independent evidence to defeat the evidence of unwelcome agreement. The need for this qualification in order for the problem to seem more serious suggests that the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, at least in the form of falsity, is faced more commonly by laypersons than by experts. And by experts, the author means to include both credentialed experts and autodidacts. This is because laypersons are much less likely than experts to have independent lines of evidence that defeat the sort of evidence that unwelcome agreement provides. Yeah, and so there's a thing. If you already know something because you researched it, it doesn't matter who agrees with you because you have independent things that it doesn't matter who's agreeing with you because you already have a good way of finding out the answer without them. Okay. Continuing, so if the white nationalist belief about crimes committed by refugees are likely false, or there is at least a salient possibility that they're likely false, then you face the problem of falsity. But there are 3 other distinct problems you might face. The following, like falsity, is an epistemic problem, and is called malfunction. Quote, the fact that S believes that P provides evidence that you acquired your beliefs P via an epistemically faulty process. End quote. Perhaps white nationals are likely to hold their beliefs about refugees on the basis of or otherwise due to some faulty epistemic process, even when their beliefs are true. Yeah, so they're right, but for the wrong reasons, you might think. Okay, if so, then the fact that the white nationalist shares your belief about refugees provides some evidence that your belief-forming process is in some way bad, even if your belief is true. So you might think you're right, but for the wrong reasons also. In this form, unwelcome epistemic company may give you evidence about the reasoning or other process behind your belief, whereas falsity provides you with an alethic defeater, that alethic being a true or false defeater because you think it's you're just wrong. Malfunction provides you with a rationality defeater, which means the method that got you to the answer is bad, as opposed to just the answer is bad. Author says it is worth emphasizing that malfunction is broader than just a claim about your reasoning processes. Perhaps you arrived at the belief in question intuitively, via perception or otherwise on the basis of an immediate, direct judgment. For these kinds of beliefs, unwelcome epistemic company may pose the problem of calling into question the truth conduciveness of the relevant cognitive faculties or processes. Alongside reasoning, intuitive reactions are one of many processes for acquiring beliefs, and so both sorts of processes are covered by malfunction. Yeah, and you can imagine that, like, say you were raised in a certain culture or situation that told you that certain people are bad, and so you react badly because you were brought up in a certain way that, was inaccurate. And so you can even think that, like, you have a certain recoil from, certain peoples or whatever. And so that would give you evidence, and then you realize, oh my God, these white nationals have the same sort of bad reaction around this minority group of people. Maybe you're thinking, even if those people are doing more crimes, because that's like the refugees here they are doing more crimes, you're assuming, ex hypothesis, that they're doing more crimes. You think, well, maybe my reasoning is bad because I'm having the same reaction as them, and there's something wrong with me. There is like a malfunction with the way I'm looking at the world. Okay. Hey, author, this is one of those things. Philosophers, some of these people are very smart. If you're thinking it, is because they want you to be thinking it. And so the author explains what I think I just said. In the case of refugees, the application of malfunction seems especially plausible. It may be that white nationalists tend to make inferences about refugees as a class on the basis of sensationalist anecdotes that are prominent in the news. This is not a good form of reasoning, but it may be that you, too, despite your generally favorable attitude towards refugees, are engaging in. Okay, so it's similar. This sort of epistemic similarity is just the kind of problem that unwelcome agreement can help us to discover. Yeah, so the author is saying here, you fell for some propaganda. And that happens to all of us. It's nothing to be proud of. You just got to recognize it. But, advertising works, and that's why people pay a lot of money to do it. And that includes what they say on the news. And so, if you agree with the white nationals, you might realize you have fallen for some propaganda. Okay. As with falsity, the evidence provided by malfunction is defeasible. In addition to overwhelming independent evidence for the truth of your belief, you might also have overwhelming independent evidence for the differences in the rational basis between your belief and the white nationalists. The importance of this qualification is further evidence that the problem of unwelcome epistemic company is worse for laypersons than for experts, because experts are more likely than laypersons, though certainly not guaranteed, to already have a thorough accounting of both their and their opponents' rational bases for their beliefs. Yeah, so if you've gone over your process already and you realize it's not because of propaganda, but because you've read all the studies. But okay, makes sense. All right, now we're into the moral problems, 2.2. Beyond the epistemic defeaters identified by falsity and malfunction, refugees potentially raises 2 moral problems. The first is a problem for your own moral behavior or character. This is called vice. Quote, the fact that S believes that P provides evidence that your belief that P is connected in some way to a moral vice. End quote. Whether or not it is false based on Whether or not it is false or based on faulty cognitive processes, your belief about refugees might be the sort of view that attracts people with a certain kind of moral vice, for example, the vice of racism as manifested by white nationalism. When you discover your agreement with white nationalists, a distinctly moral possibility is made salient to you. Perhaps you have a vicious character trait that attracts people to the belief in question, or at least carrying on in a manner characteristic of this trait, and this is part of how you came to hold your belief. In this way, your unwelcome epistemic company acts as a mirror of the sort of person you might be or might be becoming, a sort of person that you do not want to be. Yeah, so this is the old thing. Was kind of similar to what I was saying above. It's not that you are recoiling when you see the refugees. It's that you realize that the belief you have that they are committing the crimes is showing that maybe you are predisposed to being racist, and that might not be a thing you want. Okay, and that would mean that your reasoning is bad. All right, figuring out to wow. Figuring out to what degree your unwelcome company raises the likelihood of vice is tricky. After all, it could be that racist tendencies make it very likely that you will believe that refugees commit more crimes, but that believing that refugees commit more crimes does not make it at all likely that you will have racist tendencies. Yeah, so you might be just more predisposed to believing this about refugees, even if but the belief that they do does not make you racist, because that may be based on statistics, but you may be predisposed to thinking about this sort of thing otherwise. Presumably, something structurally similar to this possibility drives Chomsky's thought in the quotation that opens this paper, wherein Chomsky appeals to the fact that the mainstream media has different reasons from his. But notice that someone motivated to figure out which of these probabilistic relationships obtains has in a sense already conceded that they face vice as a problem. After all, figuring out where one stands here is precisely a way of responding to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company in the form of vice. It is not a way of showing that there was no problem in the first place. Another way to put this point is that one is not called on, absent some special reason, to check whether one's view makes it likely that one is vicious in a particular way. Rather, this is something that one might be inclined to do precisely in the face of a particular kind of unwelcome epistemic company. This paper argues that this kind of double-checking can be rational. Yeah, so it's basically if some racist people are agreeing with you, you should make sure that you have non-racist reasons for claiming what you claim. Like the epistemic problems, the evidence that vice provides is defeasible. Even in the form of refugees, the fact that you are generally in favor of increased acceptance of refugees is some evidence against your being bigoted towards them, though it is hardly decisive. Here, being an expert rather than a layperson is not as strong a protection against the evidence that unwelcome agreement provides. Expertise in refugee issues does not necessarily include expertise in or even reflection on one's own moral attitude towards refugees, and expertise in general is not the same thing as morally critical self-reflection. Yeah, and this is actually, I think, an excellent point on the author's part, because you can be very, very intelligent and know all the facts, but you can be just as, you can be horribly racist. And you see this in, U.S. government. Sometimes you see people that are actually they've been in politics for many years, and they seem to be just as racist as, just some really terrible white nationalists, but they know all the statistics, and they can just basically cloak themselves in cloak their racism in statistics and lie with their statistics. And this happens all the time. So, continuing, vice is not the only moral problem raised by refugees. The case also raises the following moral problem, not about your own moral character, but about the implications of the content of your belief. And it's called implication, quote, "The fact that S believes P provides evidence that you missed something important about the stakes of P that is relevant to the endorsement of P." Yeah, so, okay. So, end quote. Perhaps you do not, either implicitly or explicitly, share the vicious character trait that motivates your unwelcome company to agree with you. Nevertheless, it may be that they agree with you because they see something about the matter of agreement that you do not, and it is precisely something that appeals only to people who are vicious in a particular way, or something that makes this particular matter more important than you at first realized. Yeah, so this is the, oh, I didn't realize I was being racist problem. You'd be like, okay, I just thought this was like okay, but then like all the racists agree with you and be like, oh, I see now that it is racist. It's not an innocent belief. Okay. In the case of crimes committed by refugees, perhaps what really attracts white nationalists, though it does not function as a reason for their belief, is that high crime rates among refugees in turn helps to justify restricting acceptance of refugees, and this is, let us suppose, something that you have never considered. Whether or not this new information will ultimately change your mind, it is reasonable to react to the unwelcome epistemic company of the white nationalists, partly by worrying that such information might exist and double-checking accordingly. Given that you are someone who thinks that the acceptance of refugees is morally important, the evidence provided by implication raises the stakes of the matter. If you end up maintaining your belief, it will be in spite of, not regardless of, this new evidence. What the white nationalists may give you is some good evidence that there is something that makes careful inquiry into the question especially important. Yeah, it's like, did you miss something, and is that why all the racists are agreeing with you? Maybe. But like the author says, it's worth checking. If like everyone you don't like agrees with you, maybe you got the and you thought you had, like, you looked into the matter, maybe you missed something along the way. It's like you reasoned well, but there was something else that was going on that you just didn't realize. So like there's let's see, is there a good example of this? This is interesting, this paper. I'm trying to think of a good example of like something you missed. Like they had this example that they had right here. It was like completely arbitrary and dumb. I'm trying to think of something good, but these sorts of things are you have to get into the weeds in some sense. Like, why are they like it's these are dog whistles. So like you might agree with like some statement in general, but you didn't realize that there was a dog whistle there because it just is saying some other thing in like sort of coded language that is really what's going on. And so you were agreeing with like, a statement, all lives matter. Of course all lives matter, but it's basically denying that like the way black people are treated in the United States of America is worse off than how white people are treated in the United States of America. And so it's like, yes, I agree that all lives matter, but you're missing the point that when people say Black Lives Matter, it's pointing out that things are worse off for the Black Americans. And so it's like, yeah, well, I agree in like the abstract, but the whole point is that you're missing a very important fact that is going on in the background when you say Black Lives Matter. Okay. Refugees is a case where you very well may face any of at least 4 different versions of the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, 2 of which are epistemic and 2 of which are moral. But it is important to recognize that these versions of the problem are related to each other in complicated ways. For example, consider the following case in which one might argue that only the moral problems arise. And this is called selectivity. Quote, "You and Fred are in the same academic department in the 1930s, Germany. Fred is known to be anti-Semitic and is meticulous when it comes to finding fault in his Jewish colleagues' work. When it comes to everyone else, however, Fred just doesn't pay that much attention. Despite not thinking of yourself as an anti-Semite, you find that your own view of your Jewish colleagues matches Fred's, and that you also don't pay that much attention otherwise." Okay, so end quote. Selectivity is a case where your beliefs is at least threatened by vice and implication, but it is not obvious whether it is threatened by falsity or malfunction. While I do not think that it is in fact common that someone is rationally and accurately attuned to all and only the faults of one's Jewish colleagues, less theoretically ideal cases that resemble this one do exist in the real world, and so it is a useful possibility to explore. Oh, absolutely. You'll see that, like, I know in the United States, female academics are more harshly criticized than their male counterparts. And so it's like, now maybe more of those, like, maybe they're pointing out the flaws is a good thing to do, but it makes like the female philosophers, it wrong foots them because they have to deal with more problems, and then overall that may actually make other people think that the female philosophers are wrong more often. and it's not fair. Like, that's just not fair. But like in some cases, like, well, okay, it's going to be criticized. It'll be criticized eventually over time. But the fact that you're letting everyone else slide is, that's wrong. Okay. So author says, first, what is wrong with Fred such that his agreement poses a problem? Fred's particular beliefs about his Jewish colleagues do not in themselves, ex hypothesi, immediately reveal any distinctly epistemic problems, but in their wider context or pattern, they reveal serious moral problems, and these problems underwrite the application of vice, an implication to the case. Vice applies to encountering Fred's epistemic company because Fred's record of accuracy and rationality about his Jewish colleagues is plausibly due to a moral vice, anti-Semitism. It takes a peculiar sort of selective attention to identify all and only the faults of one's Jewish colleagues. Yeah, this is what I was saying. And it is morally objectionable to focus one's epistemic energies on all and only crimes committed by members of that group, even if one does so in an epistemically excellent manner. So when you find yourself agreeing with Fred, you acquire evidence both that your belief is epistemically appropriate as far as truth and evaluation of evidence is concerned, and that this is due to something morally vicious. Yeah, if you're not giving everyone the same kind of pass, then like you're only, singling out one group of people for being extra harsh. That's completely vicious. Okay. Implication may also apply to selectivity because it's highly plausible that expending selective energy on identifying and pursuing faults among only Jewish colleagues in Nazi Germany serves to prolong and intensify systemic oppression of Jewish people. Perhaps this is something that either implicitly or explicitly appeals to Fred. As with vice, this is wholly consistent with you being within your purely epistemic rights in believing what you believe. The upshot is that because there are moral constraints on epistemic practice, in this case how we direct our critical attention, and violating these constraints is compatible with obeying purely epistemic constraints, it seems possible to face the moral but not the epistemic problems of unwelcome epistemic company. Yeah, and this is the wasting people's time. Like, because, you can waste people's time and with like all the objections, and if you only do it with like certain groups of people, you might be right in wasting their time, but like, I mean, epistemically right because there's all the details, but like it's a problem. Okay. Author says, however, things are not so simple. In particular, there are reasons for thinking that vice and implication are reducible to malfunction. I will consider these in order. Vice may reduce to malfunction because the presence of a moral vice, that, for example, anti-Semitism, in the etiology of a belief system to provide some defeasible grounds for debunking that belief via a rationality defeater. Okay, let's see. This may be the case, but it need not be. Notice that the case of selectivity itself actually avoids such a debunking, and therefore avoids a reduction from vice to malfunction. Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with the reasoning there if you are finding actual problems in terms of the research? Okay, how does it do this? The moral vice of anti-Semitism does not play a rationalizing role in the actual content of the matter of unwelcome agreement. Rather, the moral vice is merely the putative cause of Fred's otherwise excellent epistemic skills being directed as they are. Compare a purely moral case of someone in a dominant racial group who helps all and only people who share their racial identity on the basis of antipathy towards those who do not. This is one sense in which a person's actions helping so-and-so are morally right, but another sense helping only so-and-so for bad reasons in which they are wrong. In such a case, the narrowly right actions in the relevant context provide evidence for a moral vice. Let me finish this up. Likewise, in cases that resemble selectivity, there is nothing wrong with the beliefs per se, epistemically speaking, but in the wider social as well as motivational context, these beliefs provide evidence of a moral vice. In finding that we agree with such a person, we may worry that we share this vice. Yeah, I mean, this makes sense. Like, say you were, like, helping the poor all the time, but you only help white people who are poor. It's like, well, what's the difference between a poor white person and a poor black person? There is no real difference. I mean, color of skin has nothing to do with your economic status. And so the fact that, like, this person only seems to go help the white people, that would make it look like, well, they're doing great things, but they're really distributing the good only in certain areas, and that distribution of the good seems unfair. Notice further that even in cases where we can extract the problem of malfunction from the problem of vice, say because of moral vice does not play a rationalizing role for the belief, this is not a full reduction. If it turns out that your belief that P is the result of faulty reasoning in precisely the sense that it is based on epistemically irrelevant racist attitudes, you still face two distinct problems. True, in this kind of case, the moral problem, having racist attitudes, itself poses an epistemic problem of having irrational beliefs, but that does not mean that having racist attitudes fully reduces to having irrational beliefs. Another way to put the point, having immoral attitudes is a problem and using them irrationally is another. Yeah, so you can be racist, but how you use them is not the same thing. So being racist and doing racist things are separate. So it's like you can hate people, but if you don't act on it, it's different. If you act on it, that's a separate problem. Okay, what about implication? It might seem that implication reduces to malfunction because to the extent that you miss the implications of the content of your belief, your reasoning is impoverished. However, as with vice, this merely shows that implication can pose an epistemic problem in addition to a moral problem, as when a bad implication of a belief is also a rational ground for rejecting it. A controversial instance of this phenomenon involves what is sometimes called pragmatic encroachment. Quote, pragmatic encroachment. Some philosophers have recently argued that the epistemic standards for holding a particular belief might be raised in cases where the purely practical states of that belief are likewise raised. If this view is right, then in cases where the evidence of implication is evidence of high stakes, it might give you reason to think that your belief is insufficiently justified. This is one way in which a moral problem of unwelcome epistemic company can in turn pose an epistemic problem. All right, so this is very interesting in terms of writing right here. This is, I don't know the quotes here, but this is bringing in criticism of other literature where pragmatic encroachment is something that gets talked about nowadays. So from actually being what looked like a sort of a narrow little meme topic, this person has now just brought in a whole wider range of people that talk about pragmatic encroachment and how this topic, God, I can't say encroachment today, how this topic actually gives light on this. So again, we're complimenting this person in terms of their writing. They took from what it looked like not a very a topic that's kind of narrow, and they just widened it to talk about something else that's going on in the literature. Okay. Author says, but this need not be the situation. After investigating a matter of unwelcome agreement, you may find both that there was nothing wrong with your prior reasoning and that you were non-culpably ignorant of some unseemly implication of the content of your belief that attracts people with a particular moral vice, but does not raise the stakes for that belief. Perhaps less surprisingly, you might face the epistemic, but not the moral problems of unwelcome epistemic company. Consider the following case. Calculator. Quote, you are calculating a complicated tip at a restaurant. You are aware that your companion has a peculiar calculator programmed to frequently but not always make errors in basic arithmetic that are very common among human beings. The calculator agrees with you. End quote. Calculator is a case where your belief is threatened by falsity and malfunction, but neither vice nor implication. Epistemically speaking, the issues you face are similar to those in refugees, and their severity likewise depends on the frequency of error and your tolerance of epistemic risk. But unless the calculator is really peculiar, there are no grounds for worrying about your moral character or morally relevant implications of your calculation. Okay, so that went over the stuff. Now we've got responses. Let's just see real fast how much more we got here. All right, so there's some responses and then disagreement. Okay, so there's actually a good amount left. I was wondering if it would be over already, but no. Where am I? Okay. Here we go. Responses 3. How should one respond to the various problems of unwelcome epistemic company? I have already described both the cases and the interpretations of the cases in ways that reveal the flavor of my own answer to this question, but now I want to step back. I have imagined and commended various forms of doubting, revising, and rechecking one's beliefs or character when one encounters either a case best interpreted by falsity, malfunction, vice, or implication, and my right to commend these responses. The general problem of unwelcome epistemic company is a problem having to do with what epistemologists sometimes call higher order evidence. Unfortunately for my purpose, the term is given a variety of disparate definitions across the literature. The term higher order evidence may refer to any combination of evidence about evidence, evidence about evidentiary relations, evidence about cognitive processes, or just indirect evidence about a proposition or belief. Unwelcome epistemic company may provide higher order evidence in any of these senses. For example, cases of unwelcome epistemic company that pose the problem of falsity seem to provide a kind of indirect evidence about the specific content of agreement, whereas cases that pose malfunction seem to provide evidence about evidence, the evaluation of evidence, cognitive function, and much else. Because the problem of unwelcome epistemic company have to do with a certain kind of higher order evidence, appropriate responses will likely resemble responses to other problems having to do with higher order evidence, especially the problem of peer disagreement. For example, faced with a certain case of unwelcome epistemic company, you will oppose any sort of revision of belief or double checking if you endorse, and it's called extreme steadfastness. And quote, in response to an unwelcome epistemic company in belief that P, you should maintain your credence that P and resist any introspective moral concern on the basis of the unwelcome agreement. End quote. According to extreme steadfastness, unwelcome epistemic company poses no real problem at all. Of course, even those who reject extreme steadfastness as a general response to higher order evidence may, like Chomsky or Trump, embrace it when confronted with unwelcome epistemic company. And there is a wide array of cases of unwelcome epistemic company that are, like blue sky, typically and correctly treated as irrelevant. Vegetarians are generally not bothered by their agreement with Hitler. Critics of American interventionism in the Middle East are generally not bothered by their agreement with members of ISIS. Mennonite theists are generally not bothered by their agreement about the existence of God with the Westboro Baptist Church, and so on. Cases like these anecdotally support the popular thought that guilt by epistemic association is no more a good foundation of criticism than its more general counterpart. But clearly not all cases are alike. Refugees bears on one's belief in a way that agreement with Hitler about vegetarianism does not. Yeah. If anyone didn't know, Hitler was a vegetarian. But again, Hitler being a vegetarian does not say anything about all the other vegetarians that came before or after Hitler. What really does the work in the cases where we justifiably reject guilt by epistemic association is not the merely logical compatibility to which Chomsky and Trump appeal, but rather that we judge that the unwelcome features of one's epistemic company simply do not bear in a relevant way or to the relevant degree on the belief's truth, normative status, ideology, or implications, as in blue sky above. Sometimes there can be a dispute about whether the problems of unwelcome epistemic company arises. For example, in the case of critics of American interventionism and members of ISIS, those who make accusations of guilt by epistemic association may believe that some single objectionable underlying characteristic motivates both parties. But rather than simply state the banality of a member of ISIS believes that P is compatible with P, one should instead interrogate which kind of unwelcome epistemic company ISIS is supposed to represent, and whether it really poses a problem in this case. After all, no one would even think to suggest that blue sky is a problem. Something other than a logical compatibility must be behind the complaint. Yeah, it's like, alright, fine. All these things that, this is going over all the problems that could happen with trying to explain away what kind of things are going on at the meta level. Okay. At the other end of the spectrum is anchored on one side by extreme steadfastness. On the other end of the spectrum, from extreme steadfastness, one finds extreme dissociationism. Quote, in response to unwelcome epistemic company in believing that P, you should always reduce your credence in P by n degree and or engage in introspective moral concern. Yeah, so this is the reaction and response. Like, oh, they believe it, I have to recheck everything I do. According to extreme dissociationism, so this was a typo there. I was like, what the heck is dissociationism? According to extreme dissociationism, one should take unwelcome epistemic company as a decisive reason to question one's belief or moral character, and to do so in a highly specified way. Extreme disassociationism is perhaps not common in self-application, but popular arguments that appeal to guilt by epistemic association seem to presuppose something like it. Many people point out to critics of Israel that there are anti-Semites who also criticize Israel, indeed with something like the structure of selectivity in mind. In 2016, many pointed out to supporters of Bernie Sanders that some opponents of Hillary Clinton were sexist, and so on. It seems that extreme disassociationism, although perhaps not something we commonly apply to ourselves, is a popular tool in the hands of those assigning guilt by epistemic association. Yeah, so this makes sense. Like, people attack other people all the time saying, oh, how could you believe what those people believe? How could you be with them? And of course, Bernie is not with, like, just people being sexist. But it does seem to try to force Bernie to, like, back up on his positions. And so it is a good attack strategy in general to, like, attempt to get people to back up on what they're thinking, and then they look like flip-floppers in the political sphere. Okay, like its steadfast counterpart, extreme disassociationism is far too strong. Unwelcome epistemic company and higher order evidence generally really does sometimes pose a problem, but sometimes it does not, even a little bit, as Blue Sky shows clearly. The crucial step, again, is to determine whether the features that make the epistemic company unwelcome bear on a belief's truth, normative status, ideology, or implications. If we were to avoid unwelcome epistemic company at all costs, then we would systematically guarantee getting matters wrong that our company gets right. I commend the far more moderate and flexible principle of moderate dissociationism. Quote, unwelcome agreement that P always provides some defeasible reason to doubt, revise, or recheck your belief that P. This reason comes in degrees of strength depending on the case. End quote. According to moderate dissociationism, extreme steadfastness is flat out incorrect, and extreme dissociationism has only a kernel of truth in the most extreme cases. Unwelcome epistemic company is neither always nor never a problem, but it very often makes salient the possibility of a problem. This possibility should not be dismissed without ruling out that one is not guilty by epistemic association in one or more of the four ways. Some cases might be easy, like Blue Sky, but some cases might be hard, like refugees. Moderate dissociationism is generally enough to accommodate the fact that unwelcome epistemic company does not have to do only with the truth of one's belief. It need only require abandonment. It need not only require abandonment of belief, it may raise problems that are both moral and epistemic in nature, and it comes in varying degrees of strength. Okay, so this is like a not very shocking answer. It's basically that, like, look, if someone that you don't like is agreeing with you, you should just double check that you have a defensible position, both morally and epistemically, that you haven't screwed anything up with your morals, and that you haven't screwed anything up with your rational sort of reasoning that got you to the answer that you have. Okay, disagreement. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company bears an unmistakable resemblance to the problem of peer disagreement. Very roughly, the problem of peer disagreement is the problem posed by encountering disagreement about P from someone who you reasonably judge as an epistemically well-positioned as you with respect to P. In both the case of peer disagreement and unwelcome agreement, your belief that P can be challenged by the mere fact of another person's or group's attitude toward P in light of your evaluation of them as agents. In the case of a disagreement, the fact that someone believes not P, together with the fact that the same person is an epistemic peer, puts pressure on your belief that P. Okay, I usually hate these things where basically you're just saying some smart person disagrees with me. It's like, yeah, they're smart, but what my answer, I'll just say right now, is I don't know what an epistemic peer is. This is like you are calling them a smart person, but do they actually know what you know? Just because they're a smart person does not mean that they have the same understanding that you have. So why, just because they disagree with you, do you start to change your beliefs about stuff? But again, this person, the author here, is just gonna say, well, it might give you reason to double check your how you got to that conclusion. Okay. In the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, the fact that someone believes that P, together with the fact that the same person is either epistemically or morally compromised, puts pressure on your belief that P. As noted above, the possible responses to the problem are at least partly parallel, because both problems involve issues having to do with higher order evidence. Another connection between unwelcome epistemic see, they didn't even do it. They just said, look, there are similar cases, and so they could have similar solutions. Fine. You see, I like this author. Again, they didn't waste any time. They just said, look, it's similar, and you can talk about it in the same way. Another connection between unwelcome epistemic company and peer disagreement worthy of investigation in its own right is the role of moral considerations in each problem. It is tempting to think that the special relevance of moral characteristics is unique to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company because there is arguably no analog to either vice or implication in the case of disagreement. It may initially seem plausible that mere disagreement with an epistemic peer about P does not give one reason to suspect that there is some moral flaw in oneself, or that there are moral aspects of a view that one has missed in a systematic way. Yeah, I mean, sure. Author says, but this is much too quick. Just as unwelcome epistemic company might involve agreement from someone you take to be morally inferior in some relevant respect, so epistemic peer disagreement might involve disagreement from someone who you take to be morally superior in a relevant respect. For example, you might disagree with an epistemic peer about the best policies for alleviating poverty, but acknowledge that your peer, unlike you, actually performs admirable work among the poor. This sort of case could very well pose an analog to vice in the case of disagreement. The analog to vice is the worry that you disagree with your epistemic peer due to some vicious trait that you have which your peer lacks. For example, insufficient love for those who are poor. Of course, this analogy requires that moral peerhood is not a proper part of epistemic peerhood. Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, it's like, yeah, you can have a moral sort of a mode of thought that like someone else has a better version of, or you have a different version of, and so you're just not getting all the moral facts. And it's not an epistemic question, it's like the moral things that you just should be doing. Hey, Pink Lady, how you doing? Hope you're well today. Welcome in. We're getting towards the end of a paper on if someone you dislike agrees with you, is that a problem for what you know? Like, why? So is the thing. The question here is now, maybe you are lacking in morals, and that's why, like, if someone that you do know, not even someone you dislike, but someone you know disagrees with you, but you have the same facts they do, but like they're just a better person than you are, maybe you are just not have the sufficient level of empathy to understand what they understand, and so even though you're reasoning well, you're just not feeling the right things at the right times to get the right answer. It's just something is lacking from the things you are reasoning about. Okay. Author says, there is not and cannot possibly be, however, an analog for implication in the case of peer disagreement. If you are subject to implication, then by necessity you do not stand in a relation of epistemic peer disagreement. After all, the analog of implication would say that you endorse your view only because you, but not your interlocutor, are missing something important about the matter of disagreement. But if that is the case, then you and your interlocutor are not epistemic peers. Yeah, you'd have to have some moral disagreement about feeling right. So it's not that you are missing a crucial step in the argument, which is what implication is saying. The role of epistemic peerhood itself provides a dissimilarity between the problems of disagreement and unwelcome epistemic company. Evolve Yourself says, two people can come to the same moral conclusion via different routes of thought. What's the problem with that? There's no problem with that. The problem here is if you disagree with them about the conclusion, and so they're not coming to the same. They're coming to the same moral conclusion. The problem is that you disagree with somebody along the about something that like you should be doing, and so it's like your reasoning about the facts are the same. There is nothing epistemic that you've missed, but the idea, I guess, in the hard part here is that on the moral side, could there be just like they feel more than you do, and so they realize that like maybe there's some moral truth that you're not getting at that has nothing to do with your knowledge of the situation. I guess they would have to be, and they just said implication cannot hold here, so it would literally have to be some sort of like maybe God ordained way of treating people is better. So there is no fact about like them actually in any way having there not being some sort of epistemic fact that you could go investigate there. Well, I mean, I'm guessing here, Evolve Yourself. But like that's why this point right here is, I agree, is very fiddly. Like this is a very fine point that they're making here about implication, and then it's like you're not an epistemic peer, because by definition, If there was something that they could point to, then they would know more than you, and then they wouldn't be an epistemic peer anymore. So, yeah. Okay, the role of epistemic peerhood itself provides a dissimilarity between the problems of disagreement and unwelcome epistemic company. Generally, an unstated assumption in the literature on disagreement is that disagreement with someone more expert than you poses an obvious problem for your belief with the various puzzles attendant to the problem of peer disagreement. Suppose that you are a layperson, we might say that encountering expert belief contrary to your own does nothing but intensify your epistemic problems. With unwelcome agreement, the issue is trickier. Here I will say something brief, though I think that this issue is worthy of further exploration in its own right. Unwanted expert agreement arguably does not generally intensify the epistemic problems of falsity or malfunction, provided that the expert beliefs are more likely than lay beliefs to be true and justified. Perhaps there are domains in which expert opinion is systematically epistemically corrupted, in which case the condition wouldn't hold. But I do not think that this will be the majority of cases. That being said, unwanted expert agreement may often intensify the moral problems of vice and implication, provided that experts are more likely than lay people to have beliefs that are well integrated with their moral vices, or are more likely to be aware of the implications of their belief. I do not know how often these two contrasts between expert and lay opinion hold, but when they do, the relevance of expertise to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company will be asymmetrical in the way described. Yes, this is the problem. If you've got some racist scientists, and then like you saying, oh, well, it's like, well, I'm a layperson, but the scientists say this is what it is, and they are experts, I mean, that's a problem. And so this is like the unwanted epistemic agreement when they have some moral problem. Yeah, and so like the author's like, that's right here. It's like there could be weird cases here where, again, where the institution is racist, or the institutionally okay, so like this is a good example from like colonialism. So maybe an institution has systematically discounted the testimony of a minority of people, and so everyone in the that academic field is basically has a problem dealing with certain kinds of testimony from a minority group because of like old colonial practices has systematically discounted that stuff. And so the fact that you agree with the experts in that case means you are actually perpetuating the old racist tendencies that got filtered into the academic mindset. So that can happen. And this is actually more important. I shouldn't even use that one. This is more important nowadays in algorithmic injustice, where you've got like search engines and other things that are racist, because those inherited the old library science classifications. That's how intelligent systems, chatbots get racist. They inherit the structures that exist online already and in knowledge systems, which come down from the old library science from the 1800s, and that has a whole bunch of distinctions in it that aren't so good anymore, but that's how knowledge was set up, and that's where these big data sets come from the past, where there are problems with that data. And so all of a sudden you're agreeing with Google, and you think, oh, that's Google, it's a black box, or you're agreeing with an AI, that algorithm might not be so innocent, it might be biased. And so this is unwanted agreement with the authority, this time the authority being a Google search, where that is a problem. So like it may be systematically epistemically corrupted. And this is a thing, like where search engines have taken information from the internet that is not good, and it will be systematically epistemically corrupted. So this is a very good point. It would be cool if like they had a good example here. They said they didn't know if it was any, but like I think you can give a good example in the technological domain right here. So finally, the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, although I think is an important and neglected problem, nevertheless does not seem quite as worrisome as the problem of peer disagreement. For example, it seems that the ordinary Christian theist should be more worried about disagreement with atheist, Islamic, and other peers than about unwelcome agreement with religious extremists. Why might this be the case? Two related reasons suggest themselves. First, for any view that we think we correctly hold, there is some reason to think that it is prima facie likely that at least some people who are bad at reasoning or bad in some other way will happen to hold the view. There are not good grounds for expecting that no one will endorse the right view for the wrong reasons. Is what I've been saying the whole thing. You have to assume that like people aren't wrong all the times. A lot of these bad people are going to get the right view, but for the wrong reasons. So this goes to the epistemic luck literature as well. We expect to find unwelcome epistemic company, and so it is unsurprising when we do. In other words, we are not very surprised by certain kinds of epistemic luck, blah, blah, blah. Like I said, if you're thinking it, it's a lot of times because they want you to be thinking it. It's like these people are very, very smart. This is from Entrapment. If they don't want you to be seen, then if they don't want to be seen, that's because if you can't find them, it's because they don't want to be found. In philosophy, if you are thinking something, it's very common because they want you to be thinking that. Okay, in other words, we are not very surprised by certain kinds of epistemic luck, where people stumble upon the truth in an epistemically or morally degenerate ways. On the other hand, for any view we correctly hold, it is prima facie likely that people who are as good at reasoning and epistemically well positioned as us will hold our view, and unlikely they will not. That is to say, we do not expect to the same degree to find pure disagreement, and so it is surprising when we do. We are at least somewhat surprised by certain kinds of competent failure. Is this actually the case? Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons behind why people think this. I've never really agreed with a lot of people in philosophy, so I actually have no feeling about this at all. When smart people disagree with me, it's their problem. I'm a steadfast person, more often than not. But like, I can see why people who are often in agreement with each other and then all of a sudden they disagree about something, like, oh no, I'm very rarely in agreement with these people, so I don't really care what people think. But yeah, that's because I'm an oddball, in philosophy at least. Oh, I gotta send the email. Send email, language peoples. Okay. Yeah. And if all of you agree with me, that's very scary, just so you know. I'm in New York City area right now, and there are a lot of philosophy talks this semester. I'm very pleased to see that the philosophy talks are coming back to basically almost pre-pandemic level, so I might go to, sit in on some philosophy talks. I'm a little excited about that there are, like last semester there were mostly, it was getting up in numbers, but now it's really getting to a much more full schedule. I know some of the stuff I saw was like some of it's only on Zoom, where it used to be like only in person or person and Zoom. But like, yeah, it's looking good again, like for just the amount of events that are going on. All right. Author says, of course we can still ask relevant questions. Why is competent failure more surprising than lucky success? I do not have a full answer to this question, which deserves an inquiry in its own right, but I suspect that the answer has to do with the way in which we expect reality to regulate our beliefs. An epistemic agent who is functioning well, or who is rational, or pick whatever epistemic desideratum you like, should to that extent track reality. Proper functioning perception of a tree, for example, should yield the belief that there is a tree. It would be extremely surprising if it did not. Another way to put the point, the failure of a properly functioning perceiver to acquire the appropriate perceptual belief demands explanation. On the other hand, malfunctioning cognitive faculties are not necessarily tracking anything at all, or in realistic cases, such faculties are only partially tracking reality. So while it is not wholly unsurprising when a malfunctioning perceiver acquires a correct perceptual belief, it is certainly not very surprising. Except in sufficiently extreme circumstances, especially when a malfunctioning perceiver is more likely than not to get matters wrong, the lucky success of a malfunctioning perceiver does not demand explanation. And there's something else going on here. Like, seeing a tree is not like being racist. Like, seeing a tree is not like I hate all those people. That's not the same thing. And so it's like that has less to do with perception in some sense than like a whole like mindset. And so the idea that like people who have like racist beliefs, and then you agree with them, that's like more surprising because they had to like work towards that, versus like agreeing with the tree. People have less work because that's a lot it's a different sort of reasoning when you're saying, oh, I just see something, versus I have like a whole background belief system that leads me to some like racist beliefs. But yeah, like they said, there is much more complicated things to be said here. Okay, and conclusion. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company is, as far as I know, unexplored by philosophers, yet it is a problem of everyday life. This is unsurprising because accusations of guilt by epistemic association are asymmetrically popular. We tend to endorse them for people whose views we do not like and reject them in principle for views we do like. I think that the rejection is a mistake. There are relatively precise conditions in which different versions of the problem of epistemic company arise and where different attendant responses are justified. By paying better attention to these conditions, we can achieve better knowledge not only about other people and the truth generally, but about our own belief and moral character. Okay, so, yeah, this is the best paper I've ever read in Epistemic. Well, yeah, I don't know if it's the best paper, but it's the one I've liked the best that I've read in this journal, because quite often I'm very angry with epistemologists, and this one is pointing out a common everyday sort of issue that everyday people have that can be actually amenable to philosophical analysis. This is a very nice little paper. As they were saying, it's related to some things in the literature. Now they're saying it's not as important. I bet like if this person wanted to dress this paper up, they could have, like, this could be dressed up to, you know, make some heavier punches, like throw some heavier hits. But they didn't need to do that. Sometimes it's not worth overstepping the bounds of what you want to do. Frank says, I think to cooperate with someone, it is useful to have a complex model of how they act, but you don't need any detail for an enemy you will never need to coordinate with. So when your ally is wrong, you have an idea already that they might be wrong. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. This is why the peer disagreement thing is that they were saying is more important, because you have these more sophisticated understandings of people you consider an epistemic peer, and so the fact that they would disagree with you, you think that they might be wrong, but the problem is if they're really like someone you had a complex model, you thought they were smart and they knew what they were doing, is it really so hard to believe that you might be wrong about the thing? Yeah. So yeah, Frank says, but you don't have the complementary expectation of a disliked person because your model of them is simple. That's fair too. That the way you're thinking about the other people is they just are evil, and therefore they're evil and therefore stupid and wrong. And so it's easy to discount them. But like, I think the author is here saying that's too fast and unfair. You have to pay attention to what you're doing, and you have to pay attention to what they're doing, and make sure that you haven't made a mistake in your reasoning. You haven't like somehow got some moral issues that have made you ignore certain evidence or over focused on other evidence, other things like that. But yeah, but this is one of my problems with the epistemic peer disagreement. What exactly is a peer? And as you were saying, Frank, you have a complex model of how they act. Do you have a complex model of how you act? And even if you did have a complex model of how you act, and then you have a complex model of how they act, how do you actually compare these things? Does that even make sense that you can compare these things? I'm not sure that it does, and that's why I don't know if there's any such thing as an epistemic peer. So this is one of my problems with this literature, and that's kind of why I like this discussion, because this seems actually way more grounded than like trying to have these abstract understandings of how they reason. Now, of course, you might know someone very well, like say a partner or whatever, and like when they disagree with you, you might have some way of thinking about how that happens. But it's like, yeah. But again, then you have to really consider maybe they have a point that you don't understand. Which would, of course, be the implication thing that the author has mentioned here. Yeah, and it's definitely easier to discount people as evil and, like, malfunctioning. Is that fair? No, but, like, I think you're practically correct when it comes to that sort of thing. Just, they're simpler, they're evil, they're wrong, and I don't have to think about it anymore. But again, that's why in the beginning of this paper, they were careful to say you're not actually certain about what you're thinking. So the fact that some crappy people agree with you, even if they're evil, that might mean you have to double check why you believe that thing if they agree with you, because you don't have the complex model of your own reasoning in that case. And the author was careful to state that. Okay. Other comments, questions, whatnot?